been gone 3 months. His flight landed late, his daughter was asleep on his shoulder, and the last thing he wanted was another 40 minutes in a car. So he stopped at the nearest hotel he knew, one he'd been to before, one he trusted. The clerk looked him up and down, gray hoodie, worn jeans, tired eyes, and said, "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." He asked for a room anyway. The clerk said they were fully booked. Then, not 3 minutes later, walked in a couple in designer clothes, no reservation, and somehow there was a room. He watched the whole thing, said nothing, just asked to speak with the manager. The manager came down, looked at the man, looked at the little girl, and called security. In a lobby full of people, they tried to throw him out. What they didn't know, what nobody in that building knew, is that he'd built that lobby, chosen the marble, signed every contract, written the standard that said every guest deserves dignity the moment they walk through the door. He owned it, all of it. And before that night was over, the staff would find out exactly who they had just turned away. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, drop a comment below and hit subscribe, because we tell these every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Marcus Johnson had not planned to stop anywhere that night. 3 months abroad had a way of stripping a man down to what he actually needed. And what he needed right now was simple: a hot shower, a real bed, and the sound of his daughter breathing steadily beside him. His flight had landed 2 hours behind schedule, and by the time they cleared baggage claim, loaded the bags, and made it to the car, it was pushing midnight. Driving another 40 minutes home in that condition felt reckless, so he made the decision the way he made most decisions, quickly, without ceremony, and without telling anyone about it. He knew exactly where he was going. The Grand Meridian on 5th. The kind of hotel that glowed from the outside, warm light pressing through the glass. The kind of entrance that made you feel like whatever was waiting on the other side was worth the walk. Marcus had been inside more times than he could count. He knew the layout by memory. He knew which elevator ran slower in the mornings, which side of the building caught the most noise from the street, which corner of the restaurant got the best light. He knew all of it because he had spent 11 years building this company from a single underperforming property in Charlotte into what it had become. And this location, this one specifically, was the one he had opened himself, cut the ribbon himself, stood on that marble floor and told his team exactly what this place was supposed to mean. He had not called ahead. That was intentional. Marcus had a habit of visiting his properties unannounced, dressed exactly the way he was dressed now. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, plain sneakers, no watch. Nothing that announced who he was or what he owned. It was the only honest way to see what was actually happening inside his buildings when no one was performing for the boss. His daughter Zoe was 8 years old and had been asleep since somewhere over the Atlantic. She weighed almost nothing, but after 3 months apart, Marcus would have carried her twice the distance without a word of complaint. She had her mother's eyelashes and her father's stubbornness, and she was currently using his left shoulder as a pillow, both arms loosely around his neck, a worn stuffed bear named Captain tucked under her chin. He held her with one arm and pushed through the revolving door with the other, and the lobby of the Grand Meridian opened up around him exactly as he remembered it. Warm light falling across Italian marble, the faint sound of jazz from somewhere near the bar, a long front desk of dark mahogany staffed at this hour by a single clerk. The space was designed to make people feel immediately at ease, immediately welcome. Marcus had signed off on every detail of that design himself, and walking through it now, holding his sleeping daughter, he felt, just for a moment, something close to pride. The clerk's name tag read Derek. He was in his late 20s, well-groomed, wearing the hotel's navy uniform with the kind of careful precision that said he took appearance seriously. He looked up when Marcus approached, and something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not in a way that most people would catch, but Marcus caught it. A quiet recalibration. The eyes moving from the face to the hoodie, to the sleeping child, and then back to the screen, in the specific sequence of a person who has already made a decision and is now simply waiting for the moment to deliver it. Marcus said good evening, said he needed a room for the night. One night, 2 guests, nothing special. Derek looked at his screen for a moment longer than necessary, and then he leaned forward slightly and said, in a voice pitched carefully for the people nearby, "Sir, this isn't the kind of place you can just walk into." The words were quiet, they were almost polite, and they landed in the space between them with the particular weight of something that has been said many times before, to many different people. Said with enough softness to feel inevitable rather than cruel. Marcus did not react. He kept his eyes on Derek and said evenly that he was asking for a room, nothing more. Derek straightened and told him they were fully booked, no availability. He apologized for the inconvenience and suggested several other hotels in the area that might be able to accommodate him. Marcus asked again, not for a suite, just something standard, somewhere to sleep. Derek repeated himself with the smooth, practiced patience of someone who had delivered this particular line before and knew it was designed to end conversations, not continue them. And Marcus stood at that counter and said nothing for a moment, just looked at Derek's face, not with anger, but with the careful attention of a man cataloging exactly what he was seeing. He had his father's eye for that. His father had spent 22 years working night security in a hotel very much like this one, and something he used to say had never left Marcus, that the way a place treats the people it thinks don't matter tells you everything you need to know about it. Not the people it's trying to impress, the people it thinks it can afford to ignore. Then the front door opened behind him. A couple walked in, the man in a blazer, the woman in a coat that cost more than most people's rent. They moved the way people move when they have never once had to wonder whether a room would be available for them. And Derek's entire posture changed. His shoulders lifted. His smile arrived fast and genuine. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian," he said. "Do you have a reservation with us this evening?" They did not. They were walk-ins, exactly as Marcus was. But within 4 minutes, Derek had confirmed a room, processed their card, and handed over 2 key cards with a warmth that filled the whole counter. Marcus watched every second of it. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The message had been delivered without a single syllable, and both men standing at that desk understood it perfectly, even if only one of them was willing to admit it. Zoe stirred against his shoulder then, her voice coming out soft and half-conscious, muffled against the fabric of his hoodie. "Daddy, are we at the hotel yet?" Marcus tightened his arm around her and told her yes, they were here, just give him a minute. Then he turned back to the desk, and his voice came out calm, the way very still water is calm, not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because whatever is happening has not yet decided to surface. He told Derek he would like to speak with the manager on duty. Derek's expression shifted for just a moment, a flicker of something he covered quickly, and then he picked up the desk phone and made a short call. Marcus waited. He looked around the lobby, at the people in the lounge chairs, at the concierge desk, where a young woman was pretending to organize paperwork while clearly tracking every detail of what was unfolding at the front desk. He looked at the marble floor, at the jazz still playing from the bar, at the warm light falling across everything he had built. And somewhere underneath the stillness he was carrying, something had already made up its mind. He was not going to walk out of here, not tonight, not like this. But what happened when the manager arrived? Nobody in that lobby was ready for it. The manager arrived within 2 minutes. His name tag read Richard, and he was in his mid-40s, the kind of man who wore a suit at midnight because authority, in his understanding, was something you maintained through surfaces. He had clearly been briefed before he reached the desk because he did not come to the situation with an open mind. He came to it with a conclusion already drawn, the verdict written before the evidence had been heard. He positioned himself beside Derek in a way that made the geometry of the whole thing obvious. 2 of them on one side, Marcus on the other, Zoe still sleeping against his shoulder, Captain the Bear tucked under her chin. Richard said he understood there had been some confusion, and that his staff had already explained there was no availability tonight, and that he was afraid there was nothing further he could do. His tone was the kind that was designed to sound reasonable, while communicating very clearly that the conversation was over. Marcus told him there was no confusion. He had watched Derek book a room for a walk-in couple, while telling him there was nothing available, and he was asking Richard to explain that. Richard's expression hardened slightly, not with anger exactly, but with the specific stiffness of a position that has been challenged by someone it has already decided not to take seriously. He said his staff had exercised their professional judgment, and that he stood behind it. Marcus looked at him for a long moment, and said nothing. He thought about his father, about 22 years of night shifts in uniforms worn through at the elbows, and the way his father used to come home and sit at the kitchen table in silence for a while before he could become himself again. His father had never been bitter about it, just tired in a way that Marcus had understood even as a child. And standing here now in the lobby of his own flagship hotel, holding his sleeping daughter, Marcus felt that same clarity his father had given him settle over him like something solid and heavy and permanent. He was not going to reveal himself, not yet. He needed to see how far this went. He asked for Richard's full name and exact title. Richard provided both without warmth. Marcus noted them the way he noted everything, quietly, completely, without making a show of it. Then he stepped back from the desk and found a seat in the lobby, settling Zoe carefully against him, and he waited. He was not finished. He was just beginning. Richard did not return to the back office. He stationed himself near the front desk with his arms crossed, watching Marcus the way a man watches something he has decided is a problem, but hasn't yet worked out how to remove. Every few minutes, his eyes moved across the lobby to where Marcus sat, and each time they carried the same message: "You are still here, and I would prefer that you weren't." Marcus noticed all of it. He noticed the way Richard leaned toward Derek and said something low that made the younger man straighten his spine. He noticed Maya at the concierge desk, her hands no longer moving, her eyes fixed carefully on the surface in front of her, in the particular stillness of someone who has seen something wrong and is trying very hard to decide what that means for her. He noticed the two guests at the bar who had gone quieter, their attention drifting in his direction without fully committing to it. The lobby had developed a specific kind of tension, the kind that forms when people sense something unfair is happening, and have each decided, for their own separate reasons, that it is not their place to name it first. Marcus had been in enough rooms in his life to recognize that tension immediately. He let it sit. He kept watching. Richard made his move eventually, crossing the lobby with the measured stride of a man performing authority, rather than actually exercising it. He stopped a few feet from Marcus and spoke in a lowered voice designed to sound discreet while still being heard by everyone nearby. He said he had given Marcus some time and wanted to be straightforward. This was a private establishment. They had already explained they could not accommodate him, and continuing to occupy the lobby after being informed of that was not something they were going to allow. Marcus looked up at him and said he was sitting in a chair in a hotel lobby. He had not raised his voice. He had not caused any disruption. He had not done a single thing that would give Richard grounds to ask him to leave. Richard said flatly that he was not asking. Something shifted in the room when those words landed. One of the guests at the bar set down their glass. Maya's head came up slightly, then dropped again. Even one of the security guards stationed near the far wall shifted his weight in a way that suggested something in him was uncomfortable with where he was standing. Marcus looked at Richard's face, at the complete and undisturbed confidence of a man who had never once entertained the possibility that he might be wrong, and felt something settle in his own chest. Not anger. Something older and more deliberate than anger. He told Richard he would like him to call security. He wanted it official. Richard gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby, and two large men began crossing the floor with the patient, practiced ease of people who had done this many times before. They positioned themselves on either side of Marcus's chair, and it was at that exact moment that Zoe woke up. She came back to consciousness the way children always did, not gradually, but all at once, blinking into the light with complete alertness, taking in the lobby and the guards and the tension in her father's posture in a single sweep. She sat up straighter, clutched Captain tighter, and looked at the two men standing beside her with the frank, unguarded curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend she didn't see what she saw. Then she looked directly at Richard. "Why are you making us leave?" she asked. Her voice was clear and unhurried, carrying the particular quality that children's voices have in quiet spaces, further than intended, reaching the guests at the bar, the couple near the elevator, Maya frozen at the concierge desk. Richard did not answer her. He looked at Marcus instead, which was its own kind of answer. Zoe looked at her father, then back at Richard, working through it with the methodical patience of an 8-year-old who takes questions seriously. "If they don't want us here," she said, "why do they work here? Isn't their job to help people?" There was no accusation in it. It was entirely sincere, but sincere questions asked clearly in quiet rooms have a way of landing harder than anything rehearsed, and this one landed like something dropped from a height. The couple near the elevator had both turned. The guests at the bar were no longer pretending to look elsewhere. Even one of the security guards had stepped back slightly, creating distance from a situation his body had apparently decided was no longer straightforward. Marcus looked down at his daughter and kept his voice level and warm, the way he always did when he wanted her to understand that the world's disorder was not her fault. He told her she had not done anything wrong, not one thing. He held her gaze until she nodded, and then he straightened and looked back at Richard. Richard's certainty was still there, but something underneath it had cracked, not from doubt, but from irritation. The question had drawn attention he hadn't wanted, shifted the dynamic in a way he couldn't immediately correct, and his response to that was to push harder. Some men, when they feel control slipping, tighten their grip. Richard told the guards to escort them out. Marcus stood slowly. He did not resist. He did not raise his voice, but he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and took out his phone, found a number, and pressed call. The call lasted less than a minute, 4 sentences, 10 seconds of listening. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and stood quietly with his hand resting on Zoe's shoulder. "Daddy," she whispered, "do we have to go?" Marcus looked down at her. "Not tonight," he said. "We're not going anywhere tonight." Richard heard it and took a step forward, and then the elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed. It was a small sound, the kind the lobby produced dozens of times a night without anyone noticing. But every single person in that room noticed this one. The doors opened, and the man who stepped out was not who Richard was expecting. Not even close. And the moment he crossed the lobby floor and opened his mouth, Richard's entire understanding of the night, of every decision he had made since midnight, began to collapse underneath him in real time. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been judged before someone even gave you a chance? Because what happened next in that lobby is exactly why that kind of judgment always catches up with you. Part 3 is coming, and trust me, you don't want to skip it. The man who stepped out of that elevator was Thomas Webb, CEO of Johnson Hospitality Group. Silver-haired, wearing a dark suit he had clearly not had time to fully straighten before coming downstairs. Beside him were 2 members of the executive team, both moving with the barely contained urgency of people who understood the precise weight of what they were walking into. Thomas did not look at Derek. He did not look at Richard. He crossed the lobby floor directly to Marcus, stopped in front of him, and said with a formality that carried genuine weight, "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry you were kept waiting." 5 words, and the lobby went silent in the way that rooms go silent in real life. Not all at once like in the movies, but one sound at a time, until nothing was left but the faint jazz still playing from the bar, which seemed suddenly and completely wrong for the moment. Richard had not moved from where he was standing. His face had not yet caught up to what his mind was beginning to process. Derek had both hands flat on the mahogany counter, as if he needed it to hold him upright. And Zoe, who had been watching all of it from beside her father with Captain tucked under her arm, looked up at Thomas, then at Marcus, then back at Thomas, with the expression of a child trying to fit a new piece into a puzzle she thought she already understood. Thomas turned to face the front desk. His voice, when it came, was even, and somehow that made it worse than if he had shouted. He said, "This is Marcus Johnson, founder and sole owner of Johnson Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel. He owns the chairs you're standing next to, the uniforms you're wearing, and the contracts that determine whether you work here tomorrow." He let that sit for exactly 1 breath, the way a person lets something sit when they want it to be felt rather than just heard. Then he said he wanted everyone in that room to be very clear about what had happened here tonight. Richard's face had gone the color of the marble floor. The certainty that had carried him through the last 40 minutes, the unshakable, undisturbed confidence of a man who had never once considered he might be wrong, was gone. In its place was something gray and inward, the expression of a person watching the entire architecture of their evening come apart at the joints. He opened his mouth. Marcus looked at him and waited, and what came out was not an apology and not an excuse, but something worse than both, a sentence that started with confidence and ran out of it before it could find an ending.
Richard said he wanted to explain that they'd had no way of knowing the circumstances, that the staff had simply been following, and Marcus let him finish. He did not interrupt, did not shift his expression, did not give Richard anything to push against or hold on to. He simply listened until the words stopped coming, and then he spoke. His voice carried across the lobby without effort, not because he raised it, but because everything else had gone so quiet. He said, "You're right. You didn't know who I was. That's actually the whole point." He said that everything Richard had done that night, he had done because he looked at a man and decided he wasn't worth the standard, not because of anything Marcus had said or done, but because of what he looked like when he walked through that door, and he had done it in front of his daughter. Richard opened his mouth again, and Marcus continued, still level, still unhurried, the way a man speaks when he has thought about something for a very long time and no longer needs to search for the words. He said his father had worked security in a hotel like this one for 22 years. That he came home every night carrying something that never fully left him, the weight of being dismissed by people who decided before he opened his mouth that he didn't matter. That Marcus had built this company because he believed that didn't have to be the way things worked. That the person standing at your front desk deserves dignity before they've proven a single thing to you. Not after you've checked their clothes or decided they look like they belong. Before. The room held every word. Then Marcus looked at Thomas, who gave a short nod, and Marcus looked back at Richard and said quietly, "You didn't just fail a customer tonight. You failed everyone who has ever walked through a door like this one and been made to feel like they didn't belong. And you did it in front of my daughter." Richard attempted one more sentence. It didn't make it far. Marcus said his name once, softly, and then told him he was terminated effective immediately. Richard's face settled into something that had no name for it. Not grief exactly, not fury, just the particular hollowness of a man who has finally run out of road. He straightened his jacket once, the small automatic gesture of someone trying to preserve the last intact piece of their dignity, and walked toward the back office without another word. Nobody watched him go. Every eye in that lobby was on Marcus, and what they saw was not a man enjoying the moment. What they saw was a man who had done something necessary and found no satisfaction in it, which somehow made the whole thing land heavier than any celebration would have. Derek was next. Marcus crossed to the front desk slowly, giving the younger man time to understand what was coming. Derek looked like he hadn't taken a full breath in several minutes, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying the particular shine of someone working very hard to hold themselves together. Marcus stopped at the counter and looked at him directly and told him he had made a choice that night based on how someone looked, and that he wanted Derek to sit with that, not with what it had cost him professionally, but with what it actually meant. What it felt like to be on the other side of it. His voice was even, not unkind, the voice of a man who understood the difference between punishment and accountability and had decided only one of them was worth anything. He told Derek he was not ending his career there, but that he would be entering a full retraining program, not skill-based, values-based. That if Derek came out the other side still wanting to be there, the door would be open, but that tonight could not happen again, not to anyone. Derek nodded. It was a small movement, but it was real, and Marcus recognized the difference between a nod that means I hear you and one that means I understand, and this one was the second kind. He turned from the desk and walked to the concierge station where Maya had been standing motionless through all of it, hands flat on the counter, eyes fixed on a point somewhere in front of her with the specific tension of someone waiting to find out whether they are in trouble for something they did not do. Marcus stopped in front of her and kept his voice low enough that it was only for her. He told her she had seen it. She had known something was wrong and she couldn't say anything, and he understood why. The structure of the place had made that nearly impossible, and that was a failure of leadership, not of character. Maya opened her mouth slightly, and Marcus continued before she could apologize. He told her he had watched her all evening. The way she tracked what was happening, the way something in her had recognized where the line was, even when she couldn't cross it, that mattered. Starting tomorrow, she was moving into a supervisory role in guest services because he needed people in positions where they could actually act on what they knew was right. Maya looked at him with an expression that moved through several things at once before settling into something that lived between relief and resolve. She said she wouldn't let him down. Marcus said simply, "I know." And he meant it the way people mean things when they have been watching long enough to be certain. He turned back to face the room then, and what he saw was a lobby full of people who had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. No phones raised, no performance, just people waiting in the particular stillness of an audience that had witnessed something real and did not yet know what to do with it. Marcus spoke without preamble, without decoration, the way he had learned to speak when the thing he needed to say was too important to dress up. He said that every person who walked through their doors would be treated with dignity, not based on what they were wearing, not based on what they looked like, not based on whether they seemed like they belonged. Every person, every time, without exception. He said if anyone in that building could not commit to that standard, he would genuinely rather they find somewhere else to work, not as a threat, just as the truth of what this company was. The room absorbed it. And then Zoe, who had been standing beside her father through all of it with Captain under her arm and the focused expression of a child determined to understand the world correctly, reached up and tugged once on his hand. "Daddy," she said, "can we get our room now? I'm really tired." And what happened in that lobby in the weeks and months that followed, the way this single night quietly changed everything, is something nobody who was there that evening saw coming. Marcus got them a room that night. Not a suite, not anything that announced itself. Just a quiet room on the 14th floor with 2 beds and a window that looked out over the city. He ordered room service because Zoe asked for pancakes, and he had never once in her 8 years found a good reason to say no to pancakes at midnight. She ate half of them, declared the other half for Captain, and was asleep again before Marcus had finished his coffee. He sat in the chair by the window for a long time after that, the city doing what cities do outside the glass mao. Indifferent, continuous, full of people moving through their own invisible emergencies. And he thought about his father. Not with sadness exactly, not with the specific grief that used to arrive unannounced and stay too long. He thought about him the way you think about someone whose life finally makes a different kind of sense to you, the way meaning shifts when you are old enough to understand what something actually cost. His father had never complained, never pointed at the unfairness and named it for what it was, at least not in front of Marcus. He had simply come home, sat at the kitchen table, and waited until he could be himself again. And Marcus had spent 30 years thinking that silence was patience. He understood now, sitting in a hotel room he owned, in a building his father would never have been welcomed into as anything other than an employee, that the silence had not been patience at all. It had been the weight of a man carrying something he had never been given permission to put down. Marcus finished his coffee, looked at his daughter sleeping, and made a quiet decision about what came next. He was back in the building by 7 the following morning, not announced, not with a scheduled agenda, just present, the way he had always believed leadership was supposed to be. The morning shift had come in, and most of them did not yet know the full shape of what had happened the night before, only the version that traveled through staff channels, which was already slightly different from the truth, the way stories always were by the time they finished moving through a building overnight. Marcus walked the floor slowly, the way his father had walked floors for 22 years, noticing everything. He stopped at the restaurant and had breakfast at a corner table and watched the way the morning staff moved, the way they spoke to guests, the way they handled the small friction points that every hotel morning produced. He was not looking for problems. He was looking for the thing underneath the problems, the culture, the tone, the invisible standard that a place operates by when no one from the top is watching. What he found was more complicated than he had expected and more honest. There were people on that floor who were genuinely good at this work. People who smiled at guests not because they had been trained to, but because something in them understood instinctively what hospitality actually meant. And there were others who were going through the motions in the specific way people go through motions when the bar has been set low enough that clearing it requires almost nothing. That was not a staffing problem. That was a leadership problem, and Marcus knew exactly where leadership problems began. He spent the next 3 weeks inside that building in a way he had not been present in any of his properties in years. Not managing from the executive floor, not reviewing reports and metrics and quarterly summaries, actually present, floor by floor, conversation by conversation, learning the place again from the inside. He sat in on training sessions and watched what was being taught, and more importantly, how it was being taught, what values were being passed down, and which ones were being quietly skipped over in the interest of efficiency. He met with department heads individually and asked them a single question that he had learned years ago was the most honest diagnostic available. If a guest came through your door tonight looking like they didn't belong, what would your team do? The answers told him everything he needed to know. Some people answered immediately and without hesitation, and their answers were right, not because they had memorized a policy, but because they had actually thought about it, had internalized something real. Others paused in a way that was its own answer, the pause of a person searching for what they were supposed to say rather than what they actually believed. Marcus noted every one of them. He did not overreact, did not make sweeping changes that looked decisive but produced nothing lasting. He was patient the way people are patient when they understand that culture does not change through announcements. It changes through the slow, unglamorous work of replacing what a place believes with something better, one person and one decision at a time. Maya stepped into her new role the way Marcus had believed she would, completely and without needing to be told twice. Within 2 weeks, she had reorganized the guest services structure in ways that nobody above her had thought to do. Small adjustments to how arriving guests were greeted, how complaints were received, how the team communicated across shifts, so that nothing fell through the gaps that always formed between one team leaving and another arriving. Guests began leaving comments. Not the performative 5-star reviews that hotels occasionally manufactured, but the specific detailed kind that people wrote when something had genuinely surprised them, when they had walked in expecting to be processed and had instead been made to feel like their presence mattered. One review came from a woman who had arrived alone late on a Tuesday with a broken suitcase and a canceled flight and no reservation, and she wrote 3 paragraphs about the way Maya had spoken to her, the way she had been looked at like a person rather than an inconvenience. Marcus read it twice, forwarded it to no one, just held it for a moment, the way you hold something that confirms what you had been trying to build toward for longer than you could easily explain. 3 months after that night, Marcus came back to the Grand Meridian for a scheduled visit. He wore a jacket this time instead of a hoodie, though Zoe had still insisted on bringing Captain. They arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon and stood in the corner of the lobby for 10 minutes before Marcus announced himself to the floor, because he wanted to see the ordinary version of the place first, the everyday work of it, the thing it was when nobody was performing for the owner. What he saw was a family coming through the revolving doors. 2 parents, travel-worn, dressed for comfort rather than impression. 2 kids trailing behind them, one dragging an overstuffed backpack with the absolute conviction of a child who had decided this was a matter of principle. Maya was at the front of the house. She crossed the lobby to meet them before they reached the desk, introduced herself by name, and asked how she could make their stay easy. She did not look at their luggage or their shoes. She looked at them, at the tired eyes and the stubborn kid, and she smiled the way people smile when they mean it without effort. Within 2 minutes, the parents' shoulders had come down. Within 5, even the kid with the backpack had let someone take it from him. Marcus watched all of it from the corner without moving. Something in his chest that had been held at a particular angle for a very long time shifted quietly into a different position. Zoe watched Maya lead the family toward the desk, watched the kids light up when Maya said something that made them laugh, and then she looked up at her father with the serious, clear-eyed expression she brought to most things that mattered to her. "Is that what it's supposed to look like?" she asked. Marcus kept his eyes on the family settling in, on the tired parents finally exhaling, on the kid with the backpack letting it go. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it's supposed to look like." Zoe considered this with the quiet thoroughness of a child who does not accept easy answers, and then she nodded once, the decisive, filing it away nod of someone who has just confirmed something important, and reached up and took her father's hand. Marcus held it, and they stood there together in the corner of the lobby he had built, watching the place finally become what he had always meant for it to be, what his father's silence had always deserved, what every person who had ever been made to feel small in a room like this one had always been owed without ever being given it. He had not built this company to prove something to the people who had looked through him. He had built it because his father came home tired in a way that should not have been possible, and because a child watching that quietly decides either to accept the world as it is or to spend their life building a version of it that works differently. Marcus had made his choice a long time ago, and standing in that lobby, his daughter's hand in his, watching a stranger's family feel welcome before they had proven a single thing to anyone, he understood that the choice had been worth every year it had taken to get here. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone who carried more than they ever said out loud, or if it made you think about the way we treat people before we know their name, subscribe. Because every week we tell stories like this one, stories about quiet dignity and what it actually costs to build something good in a world that doesn't always make it easy. Hit subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories worth telling, and the next one is already waiting for you.